The rain had fallen for 3 days straight, soaking the Louisiana wetlands until the earth groaned beneath the weight of water. Mud turned into deep, clinging sludge. Trees sagged under the weight of soaked leaves. The swamp was no place for a man that night, and even the frogs had gone quiet. But Elias Ward didn't care. He stood ankle-deep in muck, soaked to the bone, listening. A sound had reached him through the storm, thin, high-pitched, and desperate. Not the cry of a bird. Not a coyote's whine. It was sharp, urgent. Alive. Elias adjusted the brim of his hat and squinted through the curtain of rain. The sound came again, closer now. A keening wail carried across the black water like a child screaming in the dark. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. He'd heard something like it once before. He moved, forcing his boots through the mud, each step a fight. Cypress knees jutted up like claws around him. He passed ghostly trees draped in moss, their limbs stretching out like grieving hands. The air reeked of decay, sweet and fetid. He didn't slow. A sudden splash snapped his head to the left. There, half submerged in the swampy pool, a foal thrashed weakly, legs kicking at the water. Its chestnut coat was slicked with grime and blood. Tangled reeds clung to its legs. One eye, wild, panicked, met Elias's for a moment before it vanished beneath the surface. "Hold on," Elias whispered, tossing his rifle into the brush. Without another thought, he plunged in. The cold hit like a punch to the lungs. He fought his way toward the spot, pushing through sludge that threatened to consume him whole. His fingers scraped against something soft, trembling. He grabbed hold, wrapping his arms around the foal's chest, and pulled. It didn't budge. The swamp gripped the animal like a living thing, sucking it down. The foal cried again, weak, wet. Elias shifted, planting his boots against a hidden root, and hauled with everything he had. A grunt tore from his throat. His muscles screamed. And finally, with a sickening slurp, the foal came loose and tumbled into his chest. They collapsed together into the muck. The foal lay still, breath rapid. Elias lifted its head. Blood streamed from a gash on its leg. It was small, not more than a few months old. Baby. His hands moved instinctively, checking its neck, its limbs. Nothing broken, but it was close to drowning, close to death. He looked around. The storm hadn't let up. The trail back to his cabin would be slow, and the foal wouldn't survive another night like this. But he couldn't leave it here. "You're coming with me," he muttered. He shifted the foal across his shoulders. It whimpered softly but didn't fight. Elias staggered back through the swamp, teeth clenched against the cold. Every step was agony, but something inside him wouldn't let go. The cabin lights finally pierced the trees like warm, distant stars. His breath came in broken gasps as he reached the porch and gently slid the foal onto a pile of blankets by the hearth. He knelt beside it, brushing wet leaves from its coat. Its eyes fluttered open, dazed. "You're safe," he whispered. "You're safe now." He stayed there until the fire warmed the room and the storm's rage dulled to a whisper on the roof. The foal slept. Elias sat back, staring into the flames. His hands trembled. He hadn't touched another living creature with that kind of care in over a decade. Since Leah. Her name hung in his chest like a stone. His daughter, gone in a blink on a rainy day just like this. A moment's inattention. A flash of headlights. Then silence. Elias had never forgiven himself, not truly. He'd left everything behind after that. His job. His friends. The house with its pink-painted bedroom. Now all he had was this land and his ghosts. Until tonight. The foal stirred. Elias moved to its side again and placed a bowl of warm oats nearby, mixed with honey and a bit of milk. The foal sniffed, then slowly began to eat. "Good girl," he said softly. "You're a fighter." He studied her. Slender legs, deep chestnut coat with a pale blaze down her nose. Her mane clumped in muddy strands, but her eyes were alert now. Intelligent. Wild. "You need a name," he said. "Something strong. Something true." The storm had brought her. The rain had nearly taken her, and yet she'd lived. "Rain," he said. "That's what I'll call you." Rain blinked, then nuzzled her muzzle into the blanket. By morning she was standing. Elias fashioned a sling to keep her from stumbling too hard, reinforcing it with old canvas and rope. Her wound would need tending. He cleaned it with boiled herbs and salve, muttering reassurances as she winced. The routine settled quickly. Feed her, clean her, watch her grow stronger. But something wasn't right. Each night, just before dusk, Rain would pace near the barn door. Her ears would perk and she'd let out a soft, haunting whinny into the trees. Elias would step outside, rifle in hand, scanning the tree line. But he saw nothing. Still, the hair on his arms rose. On the fourth night, as the sun sank red behind the moss-covered trees, Elias spotted it. Just beyond the clearing, half hidden in fog, stood a silhouette. Tall, broad, equine. A wild horse. It stood perfectly still, staring toward the barn. Then another shape appeared beside it, smaller, nervous. The rest of the herd. They didn't approach. They didn't run. They watched. Elias stepped forward, but the stallion let out a low snort and vanished into the brush, the others following like shadows swallowed by night. Rain whinnied, ears straining forward. "That's your family," Elias whispered. "They're waiting." He sat outside long after dark, staring into the trees. Something inside him twisted. The foal belonged out there, not here. But she wasn't ready, not yet. And neither was he. That night dreams took him. Rain and Leah side by side in a field of wildflowers, laughing. The sky turned black. Rain vanished in the fog. Leah reached for him, but he couldn't move. Her voice echoed in his mind. "Don't lose her too." He woke drenched in sweat. 2 days later, trouble came. The man's name was Buck Halston. Elias hadn't seen him in over a year, but the old rumors still clung to him. Poacher, drifter, all bad news. Buck showed up on foot, casual as could be, leaning against the fence. "That your horse?" he asked, jerking a thumb toward the barn. Elias stepped between him and the door. "She's not for sale." Buck smiled, a cold, crooked thing. Didn't ask if she was. Just heard some sounds in the swamp, figured someone was harboring strays. Elias's jaw tightened. "She's not a stray. She was dying out there. Still wild, ain't she? Mustangs ain't meant to be coddled. They're worth something, though. Some folk'll pay thousands for blood like that." Elias didn't reply. Buck tipped his hat. "Nice little prize you got. Shame if she wandered off again." Elias watched him go without a word. But the knot in his stomach grew tighter. That night, he locked the barn and slept with his rifle close. Rain seemed uneasy too, pacing more than usual, ears flicking toward invisible sounds. Just after midnight, Elias heard the boards creak. He bolted upright and ran to the barn. The door stood open. A trail of broken branches and hoofprints led into the woods. A length of rope lay on the ground, cut. And near the fence, half buried in mud, was a brass bullet casing. Elias picked it up with shaking fingers. She was gone. Again. His chest ached with a rage and sorrow so sharp it stole his breath. Not this time. He grabbed his rifle and storm lantern and stepped into the trees, following the trail. Thunder rumbled overhead, low and distant. Somewhere deep in the woods, a Mustang cried out. And Elias did not stop walking. The lantern swung from Elias's hand, casting trembling circles of gold through the thick darkness. Trees loomed like towering sentinels, their limbs tangled in shadows. The path was barely a path at all, just broken underbrush and wet soil, punctuated by prints of hooves and heavy boots. Elias moved quickly, eyes sharp, rifle balanced in his free hand. Rain was out there, somewhere, scared and alone, or worse. Every snap of a branch twisted his gut tighter. The storm clouds were thick above, moonlight crushed under their weight. All around him, the swamp buzzed with life, but Elias heard only the thud of his boots and the echo of that single gunshot. Buck Halston wasn't known for giving up. If he'd taken the foal, it wasn't for a joyride. Elias thought of Rain's eyes, the way they lit up when she saw him each morning. How she'd leaned into his hand, trusting him. She had been terrified at first, but little by little she had allowed herself to believe she was safe. And now someone had torn her away again. He pushed through a thicket and paused, lowering the lantern. There, in the mud, were signs of a struggle. Hoofprints overlapped in confusion and deeper impressions where someone had dragged something heavy. Broken rope trailed like a dead snake near the edge of a clearing. Then he heard it. A muffled sound. Not a whinny, something heavier. A grunt. He crouched low and stepped silently toward the source, each movement controlled. The trees parted to reveal a makeshift camp. A crooked canvas tarp strung between trees, a cold fire pit, and standing just beyond the glow of a dying lantern, Rain. She stood, legs trembling, head low, bound to a post. Her eyes flicked up as Elias appeared. She didn't cry out, didn't move. But he saw it, the recognition, the flash of hope. And then fear again. Buck Halston sat nearby, cleaning a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. "You're far from home, Ward," Buck drawled, not looking up. "Let her go," Elias said, voice flat. Buck glanced at him then, squinting. "A man gets attached awful fast to things he finds in the mud. She's not a thing." Buck laughed, short and cold. "That's where you're wrong. She's Prophet. There's a guy in Shreveport who'll pay more than your cabin's worth. Bloodline like that? Wild and pure? Elias raised the rifle slightly. She's not for sale. Buck stood, knife still in hand. You really willing to kill over a foal? Elias took a step forward. I'm willing to die for her. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other. Then Buck made the mistake of flinching. In a blur, Elias knocked the knife from his hand with the barrel of the rifle and grabbed Rain's lead rope in the same motion. She reared slightly, startled, but he steadied her with a firm grip. Move, he hissed, pushing her toward the trees. Buck lunged, but Elias swung the rifle hard across his chest, knocking him back into the mud. They ran. Rain stumbled at first, still weak, but she followed Elias's lead. Together they crashed through the underbrush, his lantern swinging wildly now, casting ghost light on moss and branches. Behind them, Buck's curses faded into the wind. By the time they reached the edge of the swamp, Elias could hardly breathe. Rain collapsed onto her knees, panting. Elias knelt beside her, checking her legs, her flank, the wound from before, still healing. No fresh injuries, but fear radiated from her like heat. It's okay, he whispered, pulling the blanket from his pack and draping it over her. You're safe. I've got you. She trembled beneath his hands, but slowly, inch by inch, she calmed. He built a small fire, enough to keep them warm through the night. They stayed just inside the tree line, where the earth rose a little and the water didn't pool as deeply. Elias sat with his back to the tree, rifle across his lap. Rain lay nearby, her breathing slow, steady. But sleep wouldn't come for him. The night stretched long and heavy, and his thoughts wandered. He hadn't been a hero. He hadn't been brave when Leah died. He'd folded in on himself, let guilt eat away the parts of him that were once kind and open. He'd shut the door to everything, believing he no longer deserved love, or redemption. Rain had been just a foal. A wounded thing that needed help. But helping her had cracked something open. She had needed saving. But maybe so had he. Morning broke with a thin gray light. Rain stood shakily, ears twitching toward the sound of birdsong. Elias stood with her, watching her eyes flick across the woods. You're not meant to stay in cages, he said softly. She turned her head toward him and he reached out, placing a hand gently on her neck. She didn't flinch. That afternoon they returned to the cabin. Elias cleaned her wounds again, added fresh hay to the barn floor, and stayed beside her as she ate. She was quiet but alert, and when he stepped out of the barn, she followed him with her eyes until he disappeared inside. 3 days passed in peace. But something had changed. Rain grew restless. She paced at night, whinnied toward the trees, and refused to eat in the mornings. Elias watched her closely. Her strength was returning, but so was her longing. He knew the signs. The wild was calling her. The moment came one crisp morning, dew still clinging to the grass. Rain stood at the edge of the pasture, ears alert. Beyond the fence, in the distance, stood the stallion again, her father, Elias suspected. The same powerful creature who had waited on the fringe of the forest days ago. This time he came closer. Elias opened the gate. Rain hesitated. Her body tensed. Her eyes met Elias's once, long, deep, understanding. And then she stepped beyond the fence. The stallion snorted and Rain trotted toward him. He turned and they disappeared into the trees together. Elias stood at the open gate, heart hollow and full at the same time. He'd brought her back from the edge. He'd kept her alive. But she wasn't his to keep. The barn felt emptier that night, the cabin quieter. But the ache in his chest wasn't grief, it was something softer. Pride maybe. A week passed. Then 2. And then, one evening as he gathered firewood behind the cabin, he heard it. Hoofbeats. He turned, eyes wide. Rain stepped into the clearing. Behind her stood the stallion, watching silently. Rain approached, slower now, more deliberate. She looked stronger, taller, almost regal. Elias knelt. She came close, pressing her forehead gently to his. He didn't speak. His throat was too tight. And then she stepped back, gave a soft whinny and returned to the wild. But this time, Elias didn't feel like something had been taken from him. He felt whole. For the first time in years. The foal with no name had returned to her world. And left his changed forever. The wind shifted sharply, and Elias smelled it before he saw it. Iron in the air, thick and metallic. Blood. The scent curled through the pines, too pungent to ignore. He tightened his grip on the reins, Rain's absence already gnawing at him again, though she'd returned to the wild nearly a week ago. Something was wrong. Birds had gone silent overhead, the stillness unnatural. His boots sank slightly into the pine needles as he moved forward, eyes scanning every movement between the trees. The forest that had once offered healing now whispered danger with every gust. At first it was just a trail, a narrow smear of crimson in the dirt, where hoof prints dragged through the underbrush. Then came the broken branches, freshly snapped, and a clump of dark mane snagged on a low-hanging bough. His heart pounded louder with each step. And then he saw her. It wasn't Rain. It was another foal, smaller, trembling, legs buckled beneath her. Blood coated her flank, deep and glistening. Her eyes were wide and wild, the whites flashing in panic. She tried to stand as Elias approached but collapsed again, breath ragged. He crouched slowly, voice low and steady. "Easy, girl. Easy now." She let out a soft, pitiful noise halfway between a whimper and a gasp. Elias scanned the wound. A deep gash ran along her side, likely from wire or worse, a poorly laid trap. Fresh blood still oozed with every shallow breath. He reached for his bag, pulling out a cloth and a small vial of antiseptic. She didn't fight when he cleaned it, just shivered, flinched. And when he wrapped her with what he had, her head fell against his arm. Exhaustion had claimed her. Something inside Elias shifted. This wasn't coincidence. Rain had returned, whole and strong. But now another had taken her place, wounded, alone. He glanced up toward the slope. Tracks suggested she hadn't come far, and they didn't lead alone. There were others. Big ones. Maybe an adult horse or something else. He didn't want to believe it was him, but Buck Halston had disappeared since their last encounter. And men like Buck didn't stay quiet long. If he was hunting wild Mustangs for sport, or worse, there'd be more blood before it ended. Elias carried the foal in his arms, her weight surprisingly light. She whimpered once as he stepped over a root but didn't wake fully. At the cabin, he laid her gently on a blanket near the hearth and stoked the fire higher. "Hang on, little one," he murmured, applying more pressure to the bandage. "You've got more fight in you." All night he watched over her, each breath a fragile thread. She stirred only once, just enough to drink a little water from a shallow tin bowl he held to her lips. And as dawn cracked open the horizon, she lifted her head, barely. That was enough. He named her Ember. 2 days passed before she could stand. Her wound oozed less, and she moved with care, favoring the injured side. Elias stayed close, feeding her crushed oats, soothing her when nightmares came. And with each sunrise her eyes grew clearer. But the blood trail haunted him. He needed answers. On the third morning he saddled his old mule and left Ember sleeping in the barn, tucked safely in a straw nest. He followed the path back into the forest, tracing hoofprints and faint red stains through the trees. The trail curved east, toward the marshland that bordered the logging roads. Dangerous territory. As he moved deeper, signs emerged. A torn feed sack, a shattered crate, a makeshift corral made of wire and wooden stakes. And then the unmistakable stench of death. 2 Mustangs lay in the mud, one adult, one juvenile. Both shot clean through. Buzzards circled overhead. Elias dropped to his knees, rage boiling just beneath his skin. There were brands scorched into their flanks, clumsy, cruel letters. Property. They'd been captured. And then discarded. He closed their eyes gently, murmured a promise to the sky. No more would die like this. Suddenly hoofbeats. Quick and deliberate. Elias ducked behind a stump, eyes scanning. A rider came into view, rifle slung across his back, hat low, chewing a stem of grass like he hadn't just left a graveyard behind. It wasn't Buck. Younger. Leaner. Maybe one of his new men. Elias stepped out with his rifle aimed squarely. "You're hunting Mustangs?" The man flinched but didn't reach for his weapon. "I don't want trouble." Too late. They ain't tagged by the state. No one owns them. That doesn't give you the right. The man glanced away, guilt flickering. "I just follow orders. Halston's the one running it." Elias stiffened. "Where is he?" "A beat. Then Old Mill, South Ridge." "But you didn't hear it from me." Elias lowered the rifle. "You see another foal like the one I've got? You bring her to me. You heard another one. I'll make sure the wild remembers your name." The man swallowed hard and disappeared. By nightfall, Elias was back at the cabin. Ember whinnied softly when he entered, rising to greet him. She nudged his shoulder with her small head, warmth returning to her movements. He leaned his head against hers. "They've been killing your kind. And I can't let them keep doing it." She blinked at him, steady. That night he gathered supplies, maps, rope, oil for lanterns. And the rifle. He checked each bullet with care. He didn't sleep. By dawn, Ember walked beside him, her limp fading, strength in her step. He watched her eyes as she stared toward the pines. Something burned in them now, something fierce. A part of him knew she wouldn't be here long either. The wild called them all home eventually. But first there was justice to deliver. And Elias would not let the blood trail stretch any further. The sun rose like fire behind the ridge, casting the abandoned sawmill in a hellish silhouette. Elias crouched in the brush, Ember beside him, her small frame quivering not with fear, but with a barely contained energy that had grown stronger with each passing day. Her coat had darkened under his care, gleaming with new health, and her wound was nearly healed, a pale scar across her flank, a memory etched in flesh. But her eyes burned. Wild, watchful, alive. The mill was quiet, though smoke curled faintly from the rusted chimney. A generator coughed to life somewhere deep within. Elias counted the movements, the sounds. 2 men outside, both armed. Buck Halston was likely inside, Snake in the center of the den. He turned to Ember, placing a hand gently on her neck. You don't have to follow. You can go now. Run. But she didn't. She lowered her head, nudging his shoulder softly. It wasn't trust, not exactly, it was something older, primal. A bond made not through ownership but understanding. Elias nodded, then crept forward through the scrub. His heart hammered like a war drum. The plan was clear: draw them out, shut them down, get the proof. He had a camera slung around his neck, a battered old model that still clicked steady when needed. He needed to expose Halston, not just stop him but ruin the operation beyond repair. The first guard went down easy. Elias flanked him near the rear entrance, used the butt of his rifle to send him into unconscious silence. The second spotted movement, Ember just a flicker of her mane as she ducked behind a pile of scrap wood, and shouted. Elias tackled him before he could fire. They tumbled, fists swinging, but Elias had the advantage of fury. With both guards down and tied, he moved inside. The air smelled like oil and rot. Inside, stalls had been erected, makeshift pens with rusted bars. 2 young Mustangs, emaciated and wild-eyed, trembled in separate cages. Their hooves clanged against the metal as Elias passed. He whispered comfort as he moved, but there was no time to free them yet. Buck was waiting. The man hadn't changed. Thick-jawed, cruel-eyed, a lit cigar clenched between yellow teeth. He stood beside a desk littered with papers, shipping manifests, forged tags, invoices paid in cash. Behind him, a monitor showed a live feed of the outside pens. You again? Buck growled. I warned you once. You're done, Halston. Buck laughed. This ain't a court, Elias. You gonna shoot me? Elias raised the camera and snapped. I don't have to. Buck's smile faltered. You think pictures are gonna stop this? They'll burn you down. Buck's hand moved fast, but Elias was faster. The rifle cracked once, the bullet shattering a lantern overhead. Flame leapt to the desk. Papers curled instantly into ash. Smoke coiled toward the rafters. In the chaos, Buck lunged. They collided, fists flying, crashing through a stack of crates. Elias hit the floor hard. His ribs ached, vision dimmed, but then came the scream of a horse. Ember. She had come inside. Buck turned toward the sound, snarling. You brought that runt here? Elias surged forward, tackling him again. They wrestled toward the open door, fire spreading in their wake. The old wood groaned above them, heat warping the walls. Elias headbutted Buck, sending him sprawling outside. And then, out of the smoke, Ember charged. She was fast, faster than Buck anticipated. Her small hooves struck true, once to his hip, once to his chest. The man screamed, folding under the blows. He didn't rise again. Elias gasped for breath, blinking against the smoke. Ember stood over Halston, sides heaving but her head high. Her gaze didn't waver. He pulled her away just as the flames roared higher. They freed the other Mustangs. Bolts snapped, hinges groaned, and the frightened horses spilled into the open, fleeing toward the trees. Elias didn't try to guide them. The wild would welcome them back. Behind them, the mill collapsed. Orange light blazed against the sky, a funeral pyre for greed and cruelty. Later, the authorities came. The camera's memory card, miraculously intact, did its work. Faces on paper became faces on warrants. Buck was alive, barely, and under guard. His empire crumbled in a matter of weeks. But Elias wasn't there to see it finish. He was with Ember. They had retreated into the hills, to the quiet place by the cypress pond where her journey had truly begun. She healed under the trees, her gait returning to full strength. Each day she wandered a little further. Each evening she returned, until she didn't. That morning he knew before he rose. The paddock was empty, the gate nudged open. Hoofprints trailed toward the forest, then vanished into the ferns. He found her not far away, standing on a ridge above the river, the breeze catching her mane. She turned when she sensed him, and for a moment he thought she might come back. But her gaze held no regret. Only peace. She reared once, the sun behind her casting a golden silhouette. Then she galloped forward, down the slope, across the water, into the wild that had birthed her. He stood for a long time after she disappeared. There was no emptiness. Only freedom. Elias returned to the cabin alone but not unchanged. He continued to care for the wilds, setting traps for poachers, guiding young rangers, teaching children about the horses that roamed just beyond the trees. He kept a photograph of Ember above the hearth, taken just days before she left, her head lifted, eyes bright with fire. Beneath it, carved into the wood, were 5 words. She was never mine to keep. Sometimes late at night he would hear the distant echo of hooves on rock. And in that sound he'd find solace, not in possession, but in knowing that he had given her what she deserved. Not safety. Not a cage. But a chance to run. To live. To be wild. To be free.